Welcome to this episode of Outlook Dialogues. Last week, India commissioned its first indigenous aircraft carrier, INS Vikrant or Indian naval ship Vikrant. India has now entered a select group of nations who have manufactured their own aircraft carriers. We are told that it's a shining success of the union government's Atmanirbhar scheme, but we know that it actually reflects the vision and policy of various successive governments. Its design was approved when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister in 2003. Its keel was laid in 2009 when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, and it was launched in 2013 again when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. Manufactured at the cost of rupees 20,000 crores, Vikrant is capable of operating a fleet of as many as 30 aircraft. In fact, it's the second INS Vikrant. The first one had played a phenomenal role during the 1971 war. It is fondly named after its illustrious predecessor. Over the last week, India has seen a vigorous debate over the strategic significance and utility of this carrier. We now have one of India's foremost defense experts, Sushant Singh, with us. Sushant Singh has served in the army for over 2 decades, and he is now a senior fellow with Center for Policy Research. Sushant, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It's a pleasure talking to you.
So, Sushant, a lot of things are being said about Vikrant. Let me first ask a slightly different question. As we are told that the Navy is a tool of diplomacy. So, in that sense, what is the diplomatic significance of this carrier? Because if you remember, when India had initiated the Look East policy in the early 1990s, then the Navy was a key instrument in India's diplomatic outreach to countries in East and Southeast Asia. What diplomatic gains Vikrant can offer to us?
Ashutosh, the basic point about using Navy tool of diplomacy comes from the idea that during peacetime, these ships can go and fly the India flag. Now, an aircraft carrier, as you yourself said in the introduction, is a massive ship. Imagine a ship which can have 40 aircraft on it. It has 200 officers, 1,500 men, some 15 to 16 decks. It is like a city by itself. Now, India is a very big country like China or Russia or the United States. But most of the countries, if you see geographically, are very small entities. When such a ship goes and parks itself there, for example, even in Sri Lanka or at a port in Bangladesh or in Philippines, it creates an image, an impression, an aura of a country with great power, with great authority. It can, it can really project power in that sense. During peace times, influence various countries about the kind of capabilities that you have as a major country, as a major power. Those kind of capabilities are not available with everyone. So in that sense, it's a projection of India's power. It's a projection of power during peacetime to show that we have got this capability, we have got this capacity, we are a very big and powerful country, and therefore you should partner with us, you should work with us. To give you an example, during 1971 war, when the 7th Fleet of the United States came to India, we all still talk about it. What, 52, 53 years, 51, 52 years after it, we are still talking about the 7th Fleet. That is the kind of impression an aircraft carrier has.
So, when you said about the power projection, so this projections comes from the very size. A massive vessel, a massive ship, when it's floating in the ocean, it projects a different kind of aura, as you said, right?
Yeah, but power projection, strictly, if you ask me, as a term, as a military term, is used for countries which can project power in the sense can undertake military operations far away from their mainland. So essentially, if you look at countries which are very small, cannot even defend themselves well with their own armies or own militaries. Countries which are slightly bigger in size, slightly bigger in power, can defend themselves and are comfortable defending themselves, but cannot really go out. Countries which are medium-sized powers can project power in their neighborhood. Like in 80s, India could go to Maldives or to Sri Lanka. China can go closer to the country. There are scarcely 1 or 2 countries at any point in time which can project power, that is, can deploy military anywhere in the world. Currently, that country, if you consider the whole world, is only the United States. It can project power anywhere, anywhere in the world. China can project closer to its shores, but not really far off. Yes, in that sense, because the aircraft carrier has a component of fighter jets on its board and can go far into the ocean and deploy itself as a very powerful force.
So where do you see India? What is at present India's capacity to project its power? Only in the immediate neighborhood, that is just around the limited area of Indian Ocean region, or whether do we have greater ability as well?
No, so you are right in the sense that the ability to project India's ability to project power is rather limited in a sense. Even this aircraft carrier, despite being so massive, is much smaller compared to the kind of aircraft carrier that the United States or China can bring to the oceans. And it is a very medium-sized vessel. It is a very it's a very limited vessel in that sense. And the fact that these aircraft carriers are not easy to maintain or run also limits India's capability. Thirdly, as you know by now, we still don't have an aircraft to fly off this aircraft carrier. We may temporarily put some MiG-29Ks, which we got from Russia, but we really don't know. So the aircraft carrier, this INS Vikrant, will only become operational by the end of next year. Even by then, we would not know which air fighter jet would be flying off from this aircraft carrier. Do we have the kind of military wherewithal and the resources that are required to run an aircraft carrier and project power? Not really. So there are huge limitations to India's ability to project power. In fact, there are questions whether India has the political will to project power even in its neighborhood when it comes to very close island countries in the Indian Ocean, whether it is Maldives or Seychelles or Sri Lanka or any of these countries in the neighborhood. Does India have the political will and the resources to actually project power in military terms? That's a question which has been raised and still has not been satisfactorily answered about India.
When you said about political will, I remember Prime Minister Narendra Modi had once said, and I'm quoting him, that Indian Ocean region is at the top of our policy priorities. And the then Chief of Naval Staff, Suresh Mehta, had also said in 2008 that he wanted a navy in 2020 that would be capable of performing a constabulary role in the Indian Ocean region. So do you see that our words, do they match our actions and capacities?
Unfortunately not. The Prime Minister is used to giving these kind of slogans often. Neighborhood is also first for him, and 2A plus B whole square is 2AB, 2AB is extra. UK is also close to us. Act East policy is also there. So I really do not know whether Indian Ocean region was really the priority. As far as the Navy is concerned, please try and understand that Navy's plan was that we should be a 200 ship Navy as per their plan. And then they brought it down a couple of years back. They said, if we can manage, if we are a 175 ship Navy. Please recognize that the Indian Navy is right now a 130 ship Navy. So, if the naval chief at that point in time said that we want to project power in the Indian Ocean region or play a constabulary role, there are certain kind of resources that are required. That would require a 200 ship Navy or a 180 ship Navy. Right now, the Navy is a 130 ship Navy. I'll give you another figure here. The number of rotary and fixed wing aircraft, that is helicopters and jets, that the Navy wanted to operate at any point in time was, if I'm not remember, the figure was somewhere around 456 or something, more than 450 of them. And I think currently what the Navy has is somewhere in the range of 200 or so. So what we are talking about is the requirement of the Navy to be able to do what it needs to do vis-a-vis what it has in its fleet to actually perform those roles. Even at the current level, the role that the Navy is performing by deploying what it calls as mission-based deployments on various choke points in the region is actually overstretching the Navy. As you can imagine, naval ships, especially bigger naval vessels, require a lot of maintenance. They require a lot of support. They require a lot of overhauling. For example, INS Vikrant, which is the aircraft carrier that India uses, which came from Russia. It has been in maintenance since early 2021. Right. It is not available to us even now. So you must recognize that these naval vessels take a lot of resources, take a lot of time to maintain. are resource-intensive deployments, and we do not have the kind of resources that are required to perform the kind of slogan that the Prime Minister Modi gave, or the kind of ambition that he probably articulated at one point in time.
When you said about resources, I suddenly recalled that famous debate, the never-ending debate between the sea control and sea denial strategies. One focuses on the aircraft carriers, another on the submarines. If you remember, in 2020, the then Chief of Defense Staff, late General Rawat, he said that he gave submarines a priority over the carriers. Maybe it was a reflection of our limited resources. But with the kind of euphoria that we have seen over the aircraft carrier now, it seems that we have reversed that policy in just a couple of years. Do you see that?
No, I do not see that. And the simple reason is that the third aircraft carrier, which the Navy has been demanding for many years now, because the skills that have been generated, the experiences that have been created by making the second aircraft carrier, they are slowly getting lost unless the third aircraft carrier design is approved or a plan is made to manufacture the third aircraft carrier. Government of India has refused to approve any funds for construction of the third aircraft carrier, which clearly shows that whether for reason of resources or whether for reasons of strategy, as you mentioned, General Rawat probably formulated, India is not keen to have another aircraft carrier, which the Navy says it needs. Navy says we need to be a three-carrier Navy so that two carriers can be out in the seas at any given point in time. One for the East Coast, one for the West Coast, and one is in maintenance, being serviced at any given point in time. General Rawat's statement, to my mind, was a reflection of the lack of resources that India faces when providing for its services. A third aircraft carrier conservatively would cost somewhere around 80-90,000 crore. And I don't think the Indian government at this point or in the last 5 to 6 years has shown those kind of resources being available for the armed forces. The fact of the matter is the Indian Air Force is down to 30 squadrons of aircraft. It is authorized 42. They're trying to reduce the strength of the army by a couple of lakh people. That they've cut down on pensions by the Agnipath scheme. The fact that the resources are not available for the armed forces of this country, with the kind of challenges that the armed forces have, or with the kind of ambition that the political leadership seems to articulate, is very clear. There's a wide gap between the stated ambitions of being a great power and being and having the resources that we have.
So the debate that is ongoing about it, as you know, that China has developed carrier killer ballistic missile DF-21D. So these missiles, as we know, that they make aircraft carriers vulnerable. And also with the enhanced satellite system, most minute movements on the earth can be easily tracked. So should we go for a sea denial or a sea control strategy? What is your take on this? When our massive aircraft...
So Ashutosh, both things have merit. It depends on the way you look at the seas and what your larger thinking is, and of course what you can afford. You talk about the Chinese capacity to target our aircraft carrier. The fact of the matter is China is likely to have 5 aircraft carriers by 2030. So it is going to have sea control as well as the ability to deny seas to us. So it's directly a function of resources. As far as sea denial is concerned, India has only 16 submarines. Project 75I or 76 have not taken off. So we are not really having the kind of fleet of submarines that we would need to undertake the kind of sea denial that people are talking about. It is true, and there's an old naval saying that you can only use a ship if you can afford to lose it. You can use it if you can lose it. Right. Can India afford to lose an aircraft carrier? And I think that's a big question. If you will be scared of putting out your aircraft carrier worth 30, 40, 50,000 crore rupees during operations if you are worried that you're going to lose it and you can't afford to lose it. That is the basic point we must recognize. So I will come down to what strategy India follows, whether it is sea denial or sea control, will not be dictated by some military thinker sitting in South Block or by the political leadership sitting in the Prime Minister's office. It will be probably decided by our mandarins in the finance ministry sitting in the North Block and looking at the state of our economy and the kind of revenues that we have, which we can provide to the armed forces. I think more and more it is becoming clear that India's ability to project power, India's military capabilities, India's ability to respond to national security challenges are being dictated by the kind of resources that it has, not by the kind of ambitions or the kind of articulation that the political leadership does.
It is instructive to remember that Chinese aircraft carrier program was launched in the 1980s, whereas we had it since 1960s. Chinese launched it actually by, as we all know, by purchasing 4 decommissioned ships and then transforming, metamorphosing into one aircraft carrier. So do our policy makers even recognize the Chinese threat? Is there any policy with us how to contain China?
That's a very good question, I think, but that's a question which should not be asked after what has gone on for last 28 months on the Ladakh border. After the fact that 50,000 additional Indian soldiers are deployed on Ladakh, and the Chinese army at least continues to occupy 1,000 square kilometers of Indian territory, or denies India access to 1,000 square kilometers of territory, if not 2,000 square kilometers, as Manoj Joshi has said in his new book. I think the fact that China poses a much bigger challenge than anyone else to India should be clear to India's policymakers. The fact that the Chinese Navy is the biggest navy in the world, bigger than even the United States at this point in time, and actually the United States is unable to match the kind of navy that China now has. The challenge is huge. The fact of the matter is that the Chinese have demonstrated great ability to manufacture and master technologies which Indians thought were not easy to do. So the fact is that for an aircraft carrier landing an aircraft, a fighter jet, on that very small strip and taking it off is a very specialized skill. And not many people thought that the Chinese pilots would be able to acquire that skill so quickly, but they did it. Chinese economy is 5 times India's size. Chinese defense spending is 4 times greater than India's size. Chinese technological capacity, whether in defense manufacturing or in space. How many Indians recognize that China has a space station up in the air? India does not have a space station. It has a space station of its own, which is up in the air. It's sending a mission to the moon, a manned mission to the moon in next 10 years. We are talking about a country which is really, the power gap between India and China has become huge. So it is fine to look in the past and say, oh, the Indian GDP and the Chinese GDP per capita was same in 1990. But since then, the worlds have moved in different direction, and particularly after 2008 economic crisis, China has really taken off, whereas India stagnated post the demonetization scheme in 2016, and Indian economy never really could make up that gap which China had built vis-a-vis India.
And when you look at the Indian Navy and the Indian Ocean region, the situation even they were more gloomy, because when you realize that the Chinese have built what they say the string of pearls in the form of port developments in Myanmar, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and recently Sri Lanka allowed a Chinese research ship to dock at Hambantota despite Indian objections. In which direction then Indian Ocean region is moving? Where do we see it 5 years from now?
There are limitations. As you gave the example of Sri Lanka, India asked Colombo to not let the vessel dock. It put a lot of pressure on Colombo, and India supplied so much of aid to Colombo, humanitarian aid, tried to look after it. But the fact of the matter is that once the Chinese start putting pressure, it is pressure from 2 major powers, and Colombo succumbed to Chinese pressure. This is what more and more we see
Exactly.
in the region.
Yeah,
So the fact that it's not about for a lack of strategy. Strategy, of course, the idea that India needs to resist Chinese force projection, Chinese influence is very clear. But it is not easy for India to execute any such strategy because of the limitations that we have discussed so far.
So when K.M. Panikar spoke about the significance of Indian Ocean, and when it was said that whosoever controls and dominates the Indian Ocean will dominate Asia, does it appear that 10 years from now, Chinese will have a far greater hand over the Indian Ocean region?
Yes, that's a fear which many former naval chiefs and serving Navy chiefs have expressed in private and publicly after retirement, that in the next 5 to 6 years, we are likely to lose our primacy within the Indian Ocean region to the PLA Navy, which will have much more resources, much more political weight, and much more power to project in the Indian Ocean region. In any case, Indian Ocean region is becoming a very contested region. If you work with your partners, whether it is the Australian Navy or the US Navy or the Japanese Navy, that also gives the PLA Navy a reason to come and deploy itself and activate itself by saying that they are trying to gang up against us. So yeah, that's a fact. What the apprehension or the fear that you express is actually a fear which many former naval chiefs have expressed themselves, that the way it is going, unless India really ups the scales up its program for shipbuilding, for having more resources for the Navy, it is going to lose its preeminent role in the Indian Ocean region. And as you know, the Chinese are very clear. Chinese scholars always say that Indian Ocean is not India's ocean. It may be named Indian Ocean. Let's not mistake by saying that this is India's ocean. And I think that's the kind of challenge that is coming for India from China in the Indian Ocean region.
And you also spoke about various contestations and claims and counterclaims over the Indian Ocean region, that even Russia has been holding military exercises with Iran and even a multilateral exercise with Pakistan. So when all these players are simultaneously coming to the IOR, Indian claim becomes increasingly weaker.
Yeah, the more the forces and the more the powerful navies operated in this area, the more difficult it will be for India to monitor, even though they may be friendly navies, they may be partner navies. And it's not going to be easy to operate with, let's say, a French Navy or a Russian Navy, while also operating with the US Navy and the Australian Navy and the Japanese Navy. And the fact of the matter is that India is not a treaty ally of the United States. India does not have a treaty with the United States like Japan has or Australia has. India has strategically had very friendly ties with Russia, and the Russians and the US and the Americans are not getting along at all right now. They're like completely sworn enemies. So these kind of situations, these kind of things make India's position in the Indian Ocean region very challenging. It's a very tightrope walk that India is walking at this point in time. How long India can afford to walk on the tightrope and still maintain its balance and not fall off is a challenge which is being posed to India. So all this looks fine till the time the trapeze artist is walking on the tightrope, everybody is clapping, but the rope is shaking very wildly now, and we really don't know how it will turn out for the trapeze artist.
That's a great analogy, Sushant, but also a bit gloomy, because if you see that India has a vast coastline of over 7,500 square kilometer, an exclusive economic zone of about 2 million square kilometer, and if you add another 1.2 million kilometer of continental shelf, I think it makes that the India's total seabed area is almost equal to its total land mass. So it's not an easy situation for us. I hope our policymakers, our political leaders are listening to it. They realize the threat, if I may use the word in as many ways, that which is emanating from all over Indian Ocean. And so thank you, Sushant. Just one last thing, if you have any book, any or any paper to suggest or to recommend in this regard, please let our readers know.
No, as of now, I can't think of any new book which has come out or which has caught my attention. But definitely, I'll keep an eye out.
Any compulsory reading on the IOR region?
So not on the IOR region, but on the People's Liberation Army, that is the Chinese army. I would recommend Taylor Freville's book, Professor Taylor Freville's book, Active Defense, which tells you a history of how the PLA's strategy evolved and what is active defense strategy that the PLA follows, because that tells us about the ideology or the idea behind how Communist China looks at its armed forces, uses its armed forces, and would use its armed forces during any operations or war. So, not exactly in the Indian Ocean region, but I would recommend Taylor Freville's Active Defense as a book on understanding the PLA's thinking in some ways.
Thank you so much, Sushant. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Ashutosh. As always, wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.